fantastic. Here we go. Power of community. This morning we talked loads about community. Lots of people use community in every slide, and I was really hoping that they wouldn't do too much stuff on that because I'd have nothing left to talk about now. But fortunately, there's a couple of things I want to cover that we didn't get to this morning because community is beyond technology. So here's my first interesting stat. If you take 100 people, 100 random people, and you score them by how involved in a community they are. It could be any community, like it could be a D&D group or a sports club or a church or whatever community you want to score it by. And you score them and you take a direct line down the middle. You have the top half and the bottom half, okay? Eventually, 50 will die. Now, I know you're looking for IT talks and not to face your own morality, but over time, we will get to a point where 50 of our 100 people will have died. Interestingly, 5 more community people will be alive than non-community people. So that's a really powerful protective mechanism. It's really interesting because actually not being part of community has the same morbidity risks as being a smoker, of being a significant drinker, or being overweight drastically. So being part of a community is as good as taking care of your physical health. It's really, really powerful. A fascinating study, worth reading. I've left the link in there. So really big, very complicated things like human beings do better in a community. This is Pseudomonas aeruginosa. It's a really common bacteria. I can't remember whether it's a gram-positive or gram-negative because my biochem was like millions of years ago. But really commonly found, especially in hospitals, where it's a significant cause of hospital-acquired infections, especially in those like bottom of the jug of water with your plants or your flowers in it, okay? And on their own, just floating around, they don't cause too much trouble. They're pretty easily treated by antibiotics. They're not too difficult to deal with. What's really interesting is they have a thing called a quorum sensing mechanism. So the minute, or as soon as a Pseudomonas aeruginosa detects a number of other Pseudomonas around it, it actually has a biochemical mechanism to detect when there's lots of them. And then it changes its behavior. It starts excluding some proteins and some lipopolysaccharides and forms this thing called a biofilm, which is a nasty, slimy goo. And at that point, it becomes significantly harder to kill with the antibiotics. So Pseudomonas aeruginosa, a single-celled, super simple organism, does much, much better in a community than it does by itself. Community is a really powerful thing. So the good news is that IT is mostly not life or death. I mean, despite what the people who make the cool logos for all these vulnerabilities would have you believe. So let's pick a vulnerability, and I'm going to go way, way back in time to 2011. And in 2011, I'd been working for F5 longer than most people stay in their jobs nowadays. And this particularly interesting and nasty bug came up called Apache Killer. Does anyone remember Apache Killer? So really quite a simple thing. All you need to do is send one carefully crafted HTTP request with some overlapping values in the range header, and it would crash the thread of Apache that you're on. And that meant you could take down a fairly sizable server, and back in those days we were still dealing with monolithic server entities, with a laptop. You didn't need an infected bunch of internet-connected DVRs or cheap Chinese security cameras, which is good because we didn't have them then, but you could really do a lot of damage with a fairly simple thing. So Apache Killer came along, and at this point there's probably a couple of things you need to know. One is that F5, and this isn't really a plug for F5, but we have this really powerful proxy, which gives you control of the application data in both directions. We also sit in front of, or sat in front of, an enormous number of Apache websites at that time. The other thing to know is that we have a programmable data plane that lets you change that data in both directions. And the final thing is we have this really cool community-driven site called Dev Central, which even back in 2011 had tens of thousands of users. So really shortly after the CVE hit the wire, there's somebody on Dev Central saying, hey, I've got a problem, I need to avoid this exploit in Apache. And if is anyone a Dev Central user here? Anyone? Well, if you were, you would be massively unsurprised by the response of like a load of people who were diving in, telling them what to do and helping them get a rule together. And actually, the little bit of code at the top right of the screen there's a couple more lines, but that's all you need to defeat the particular attack. And then, a bunch of other people dove in with giving some optimizations and some fixes. And this person, good old Maddie56757, had a solution to his or her problem. and they could roll that out and protect all of their Apache backend while they went around frantically patching it. Because again, this is before the days of the great people at Puppet and Chef and Ansible were really a thing. You know, you were often manually patching or trying to hack up a script to Apache or Apache. So community can protect you really, really well. The other thing to notice, and I'm not picking on this particular manufacturer, this is just like we would probably know better with our patches for our WAF solutions. September the 7th was when they announced their update to their firewall to protect you, which doesn't seem that long. August 25th is September the 7th, unless, of course, you're responsible for a large website packed full of now vulnerabilities and liable to a DOS attack, which it probably seems like quite a long time. So community can get you there much quicker. Just like Nell was talking about earlier, we can do things much better if we all work together. So community is good, and it always protects, always helps us. Are there any downsides? Well, yeah, sometimes. Obviously, you're all sitting in the audience going, "Who, me? No, I never cut and paste from Stack Overflow to fix a problem. I never do that. People cut and paste my code." Well, that's true, but also increasingly when we develop software, we rely on libraries and modules, or whatever you want to call them in the language of your choice. So anyone a Node.js user here? Okay, there's a few Node things. So we all know about NPM. Some of you will probably now by know where I'm going with this particular piece of information. And there's a really fairly popular Node package called Event Stream. And as Neil was talking about earlier, like maintaining open source code can sometimes be a thankless task. It's quite hard work. People do it in their own time, off their own back often. And the person maintaining this was getting a bit tired of being the kind of the maintainer of this code. And someone came along and said, "Hey, I'll take it over for you. I'll maintain it for you." And they're thinking, "Great, I'm off the hook, fantastic." You know, this strange person I've met on the internet will now take over my code, and I'm now off the hook, which is great. Apart from the very first thing they did was inject a cryptocurrency wallet theft malware into this package. Which is, it was slightly more complicated. They put some dependencies in, and then they put the full code in. But for the purpose of this talk, that's what they did. Which is not great. Would have been even better if we hadn't downloaded it 2 million times before anyone realized. And so at this point, the obvious IT response is panic. This is now my corporate headshot. I'm saving that. I like that so much. The image is down there. So what's that got to do with DevOps? Well, I read this on the internet. I think it was by Laurie McVitie, who's one of our principal evangelists. I hope it wasn't, because I haven't credited her and she'll be out for my blood. But essentially, you can buy every DevOps tool on the market, and you can end up further away from where you're meant to be. And just as we were all talking about this morning, Tara was saying that it's all about the people, because unless you have a community, an internal potentially community that's empowered to work together, you are going to fail, and that's my quote. And I get to talk to a few DevOps people, and they are often like cleaning up the problems of other things that have gone on where we haven't done the community. And I'm sure everyone in their organization has occasionally put tools in place without the people part. I've certainly done it. I've certainly been part of it. So it's really, really important that we manage that. So community is really important to F5 and NGINX, which is now part of F5. If you're a tool and F5 user, you'll be familiar with Dev Central. If you use NGINX, you'll know there's plenty of places you can get help there. What I wanted to say is we are super committed to community. Community is central to everything we do at F5. I know we are a commercial software and hardware company that makes things. But if you listen to any of our execs talk, and if you're fortunate enough to see Francois talk about the things we do and the amazing presentations he gives, community and helping people work together, both inside our community and externally, is really, really important. So I just want to leave you with saying that we are absolutely committed to the 300,000 Dev Central users we have. We're absolutely committed to maintain the code for the 400 million websites that use NGINX. And we're absolutely committed to our local and our global communities. We have made a significant uptick in the global corporate responsibility of F5. We are giving time, we are giving money to these people. We are sponsoring coding, food banks, homelessness shelters. Community is really, really important to us. And thank you for listening.